So if you've got a question, you can stick your hand up, and we'll be happy to get to that. We do also have the recording of this session afterwards if you'd like to refer back to it later. So Eric, I'd like to start by asking you, what is the hardest question you've ever been asked in an interview?
That's a pretty good one. Hi, everybody. And thank you for sticking around till, I know it's dangerous to be between Australians and beer, I've heard anyway, and I see there's a bunch in the back, so we'll get it soon, don't worry. I mean, the hardest question for me is actually the same as the one I actually ask to entrepreneurs, which is how do you know that you're making progress? And you know, when you have a regular job, you know that you're making progress because somebody else, a manager, makes a plan for you, and your job is to make sure that you're ahead of plan, you know. And so if you're on time, on budget, you have confidence that what you're doing makes sense. If you build high quality stuff, you get it out on time, customers seem to like it, you're in good shape. But you know, in entrepreneurship, we face more uncertainty than that, and we don't even know what we don't know. And then trying to change how entrepreneurs practice has even more uncertainty loaded into it, and that's the question I struggle with all the time.
So what is an entrepreneur? What do you define an entrepreneur as?
In the book, I outline a formal definition, which is a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty, and an entrepreneur is anybody that manages a startup. And what's key in that definition is that it doesn't actually say anything about how big the company is or sector, what industry you're in. Doesn't mean that you are in a garage eating ramen noodles. It turns out it doesn't matter what kind of noodles you eat. What matters is the context in which we work, and we work in that context of extreme uncertainty. So the weirdest thing to me, traveling around the world and talking about these ideas, is I've gotten to meet so many people who don't look like the movie version of an entrepreneur, but face the exact same challenges, are working in the same way as the venture-backed entrepreneurs and garage entrepreneurs that I see walking down the street here in San Francisco. And I think it's important that we kind of have that context in mind, because if we're going to make the practice of entrepreneurship better, we have to kind of know an entrepreneur when we see one.
So you mentioned startups in that, but you didn't mention anything about a lean startup. So how is a lean startup different, and what is a lean startup?
So for those that are totally new to this, I'll give you the brief version. Hopefully we'll get a chance to answer questions and talk about it in more detail. But the word lean comes from lean manufacturing. So a lot of the sessions you've already heard about techniques from lean, like Kanban in the previous session, and single piece flow, and all the techniques of lean manufacturing. What we want to do is apply those same ideas to the practice of entrepreneurship, which is new product development under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And if you know the history of lean and its basic tenets, you'll know that the most important thing in lean manufacturing is learning to tell the difference between which activities create value and which ones are wasteful. And what we want to do is eliminate the waste and focus on improving the flow and cycle time wherever we're doing value-creating work. The challenge for entrepreneurs in applying that definition is it's unclear what our definition of value should be. Because in a manufacturing context, when we already know who our customer is and we already know what they want, then value is defined as delivering a high-quality product to the customer, at a good price, et cetera. And we want to improve the fundamental cycle time. It's about how much time elapses between when we get an order from a customer and when we've delivered a high-quality result to that customer, and we systematically shrink that cycle time down. But entrepreneurs often don't even know who their customer is. We don't even understand what the customer defines quality to mean. So how can we know if we've delivered a high-quality result? In fact, most of the time as entrepreneurs, we are building something that nobody wants. So why are we so proud that we did it on time and on budget? Right? We're very efficiently doing that, which should not be done at all. So my proposal, the book is an extended argument in favor of this idea, is that value for entrepreneurs is learning how to build a sustainable business. Learning whether we're on the right track or whether we need to pivot. And that learning has to be validated scientifically if it's going to have any meaning, if we're going to have confidence in it. And that by adopting practices from traditional lean, we can focus on our fundamental cycle time as entrepreneurs, which is not just delivering a high-quality product. It's actually how much time elapses between when we have an idea and when we've discovered whether that idea is brilliant or more likely crazy. So that feedback loop is still really important. We can still use the same techniques of Kanban and batch size and cycle time. We're all trying to drive that down. but what we're trying to do is discover the truth of the assumptions that underlie our business plan.
So you've mentioned a lot of, I mean, we've been talking for the past 2 days about Scrum, Kanban, and many different agile practices, and you touched on a few there, talking about the cycle time.
Yeah.
How does a lean startup and agile, how do they dovetail?
Sure. So I was always a real agile zealot through my whole career. I started as a computer programmer, and I thought I'd be programming computers my whole life. I never thought I would be doing whatever this is for a living. It's a very strange thing for a programmer to do. It doesn't involve as many basements as I'm used to. And when I was a troublemaker trying to get people to be more agile, it was really easy to know what to do. I just told everybody, whatever problems we're having, it's because we're not agile enough. Let's just be more agile. And because I was the troublemaker in a dominant culture that was generally waterfall, any incremental improvements I could make towards agile, were huge wins and made me look like a genius. But I still had to fight with a dominant culture. Well, when it came time for me to build an engineering team at my last company, which is called InView, I was in charge. So we were agile from day one. I was really into extreme programming. I was very focused on the usual practices. And I had this very funny experience that really left me rattled, which was that over the course of 6 months, using all these agile practices, we managed to build a product that was awesome and also used by nobody. And my focus was on, how many features should it have, how many bugs we needed. We were very rigorous about all that stuff, how well factored, continuous integration, good unit test coverage. We did all that stuff right. It's just we launched the product and nobody would download it. So no one even discovered how bad our design decisions were. No one discovered, it didn't crash anybody's computer. No one found any of our bugs. We got zero bug reports, which was awesome from the customer because they weren't bothered, because we weren't actually installed on anybody's computer because nobody would download the product. And I won't go into the whole thing, but as a result of that experience, we spent a lot of time trying to make the product better. We basically eventually discovered that we had just whiffed on the fundamental value proposition of what we were offering, and we had to pivot to basically a different business. And the nice thing about a pivot is it's a change in strategy without a change in vision. So it's not like we completely abandoned everything, but we had to change the strategy. And as a result of the strategy, the code that I had personally written was all thrown out, okay? And I want you to really think about that. The really good code that I was really proud of and would have put in my portfolio was thrown out, and also the really embarrassing hacks that I never wanted anybody to see, also thrown out. The code that was under great test coverage, thrown out, and the code that I hadn't gotten around to writing any test coverage for, thrown out. The crappy open source project that had no test coverage because I just grabbed it off some website somewhere and incorporated it, thrown out, right? Everything, like the great equalizer, failure is this great equalizer, all the code's thrown away equally. Didn't matter how good it was. And I was really disturbed because I had adopted agile practices because it was supposed to help me eliminate the waste from product development. And yet here I was, I had spent 6 months of my life committing the biggest waste of all, which is building something that nobody wants. And so agile is not the problem. Agile is a really important component in the way that we work. But nothing in the Agile Manifesto will protect you against this problem of fundamentally building the wrong thing. Built into Agile, as it's traditionally understood, is an assumption that there is a product owner or an in-house customer who can give you authoritative answers to questions like, how should this product work? And yet, entrepreneurship is the domain where there are no authoritative answers, only hypotheses. And so we have to reimagine Agile to take that reality into account, to be thinking of everything we do, all the features we build, all the marketing, all the work that we do as experiments designed to help us discover the truth or falsehood of those hypotheses. And that looks different than traditional Agile, but it will also look familiar to people if you're encountering this for the first time. I think of it as an evolution of Agile into a new domain rather than some kind of competitor or replacement to it.
So you talk about, in your book, The Lean Startup, you talk about the build, measure, learn cycle. And, we're tying that into a Scrum cycle. We're constantly talking to our customers. We've got sprint demos. We want to find out from our customers what's going on. So how is, you say that it's an evolution. How is build, measure, learn an evolution of just standard Scrum practices?
So for those who are new to build, measure, learn, here's how it works. I said before that our fundamental cycle time is how much time elapses between when we have an idea and when we've achieved validation or refutation of that idea. Build, measure, learn is just breaking that cycle down into a very simple 3-stage feedback loop. As software companies, all we really do is turn ideas into code. Everything else is a very interesting side effect, and that's building. Then when customers interact with that code, we can measure what they do if we want to. And then if we do, we'll have a pile of data that we collected. And if we want, we can choose to learn from that data, influencing our next set of ideas. So it's a very simple build, measure, learn, a 3-stage feedback loop. And the insight behind Lean Startup is that our practices should all be geared towards getting us through the whole loop as quickly as possible, rather than sub-optimizing for a part. And most of the practices that we've been taught, especially as developers, are designed to produce code as quickly as possible. In fact, it says right in the practices section of the Agile Manifesto, our unit of progress is a line of working code. But my claim is that a line of working code that nobody will use is waste, not progress. And so we have to kind of think about a new way of looking at progress. And so if you take the standard Agile toolkit, like a Scrum team that delivers once a month to the customer. There was a time when delivering once a month was considered really fast, like a very fast cycle time. Some of you remember the antique days when we would put the year the product came out in the name of the product, right? Like Windows 95 and Office 2000. That used to be considered like if you released once a year, that was good. So compared to once a year or every couple years, once a month is really amazing. But when you're trying to get through the build, measure, learn feedback loop, bundling up a month's worth of work and releasing it all at the same time, I hope will start to strike you as really inefficient. Because you might be conducting several different experiments during that time, and as soon as an experiment is done, you want to get the feedback from customers immediately. It's no longer sufficient to just get the feedback from the product owner, that the product owner says this is a good thing to have prioritized. We need to know from the end user or from some kind of reality that we made the right decision. So most Lean startups will practice continuous deployment, where we'll take the deployment cycle all the way down to single piece flow and put software into production up to 50 times a day on average. And we can do that with a rigorous process, just like Toyota Production System, where we're not taking the site down, we're not regressing old bugs, it's not cowboy coding, it's not sloppy, it's just a discipline designed to achieve continuous flow in getting feedback from customers. But then it turns out that a month is actually a compromise unit of time, because we do two things each month. We release to customers, and then we also do our retrospective and planning once a month. And it turns out that once a month is too slow for shipping to customers, and it's actually too fast usually for most teams to do any kind of reasonable planning. So what we can do is just separate those two concepts and say, well, how fast do we actually learn as a team from our experiments? And let's set our retrospective time at that cadence, but let's keep our release cadence, at the cadence that produces optimal efficiency for learning. So just to give you a flavor of how the practices start to differ a little bit from the tradition if you take this idea to its logical conclusion.
So I wonder then, Eric, you're talking about the retrospectives, you're on a different cadence. Have you found a common cadence? Is there a cadence that's particular to SaaS products versus a behind the firewall deployed product? Is there a different cadence in an enterprise business?
Not really. I mean, it tends to be, in the 6 to 8 weeks range is just my kind of experience. And the reason is because the limiting factor in making what we call the pivot or persevere decision, that's the question we really want to be asking in a retrospective is not just, are we working efficiently as a team, but are we efficiently working on the right thing? So are we going to pivot to a new strategy or should we keep going? The limiting factor in figuring that out is the human ability to learn. That, like in build, measure, learn, learning is by far the hardest thing and the thing that human beings are worst at. We in this room, all of us, we're terrible learners. Human beings hate learning, right? Because learning requires failure, which we absolutely despise. So we'd much prefer to spend our time building. We can build much faster than we can learn. And so the optimum time for a pivot or persevere meeting is long enough that you can have accomplished something and get some meaningful feedback, but not so long that you can't remember what you said at the beginning of the cycle. So 6 months, a year, nobody remembers what they were doing 6 months ago. It's too long. And generally, if you do like 2 weeks, you usually don't have made enough progress. So it's kind of you're trying to find that optimum spot when you've actually gotten real information about the quality of your strategy. And the awesome thing about using that cadence is you can then start to work backwards from the pivot or persevere meeting. So we can put the meeting on the calendar. Most teams that are doing new product introduction, maybe this will sound familiar to some of you, you never have a meeting to discuss was our plan totally screwed up from the beginning? That's a topic we don't usually want to talk too much about because it's dangerous, it might harm morale, it's a little bit scary. And so when we finally do have a pivot meeting, it tends to be at the 11th hour when the walls are on fire and the roof is caving in and like we're about to be destroyed, and tomorrow we have to present progress to a board or to CFO or somebody, and we have to save our butt. So let's try to come up with a last-ditch new direction. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I can't really see that well. No, none of you would ever do that. I see. Good, excellent, good. In other companies, I've heard this happens. And instead of that crazy crisis atmosphere, what we want to do is just say, look, we know for sure that we're going to have to pivot on the way to success. All new disruptive innovations go through these weird zigzag paths where they got things wrong at the beginning. So let's just put it on the calendar. Let's give it a date. Say, on this date, we will have a meeting to decide, should we pivot or should we persevere? And then we can work backwards to that to say, is what I'm doing today, right now, helping me gain information about whether our strategy is fundamentally working or not? And if not, let's just not do it. And that's actually the biggest savings, the biggest elimination of waste in Lean Startup, is just eliminating stuff that doesn't lead to learning. We can just let it go.
So building is really easy. Learning is really hard.
Yeah.
You're talking we need to be learning about, or we need to have the data to learn the right things. How do we go about measuring our products? How do we go about measuring, is it usability testing? Is it a whole host of different things? What's been most effective in the environments that you've worked in?
So I want to clarify one thing. It's super important. People sometimes describe Lean Startup as getting feedback from customers about our product. And I think there is a sense in which that is true, but I think it is a really misleading statement, because for most people what that conjures up is build the product, go meet with a customer and ask them what they think. And if you've ever studied the psychology literature on how accurately human beings can answer hypothetical questions about themselves, you will discover that we are horrible at it. Even simple questions like, what do you think you will eat for lunch tomorrow? People have no better than random chance of guessing. And so a question that's like, hey, in a couple years, if I built this cool technology, like, do you think you would want to pay me a certain amount of money for it? That's like you're just getting random noise back. The problem is that human beings are very confident. We'll give you very confident random noise. I absolutely would buy that, or no, I hate that thing. That's all noise, irrelevant. If I was a physicist and I came in here and said, okay, we're going to do the science of the structure of the atom. Oh shoot, but electrons don't know what they want, so it's not going to work. Never mind. We can't do a focus group, so we'll go home. You'd think I was crazy, because that's not asking the structure of the universe. You can't ask it questions. You have to run experiments that reveal the behavior of customers to see, does it correspond with my hypothesis? And that's the flavor of what we're looking for here in Lean Startup. How do we identify if customers will behave the way it says in our brilliant business plan? So, I've written many business plans that if you read them, you would weep. They were so beautiful, really excellent. And the only problem was that customers didn't read the damn business plan, and they wouldn't do what it said. But in every other respect, it was genius. It sounded good. It followed all the good principles of proper strategy design, et cetera. And product was amazing and had great technology. And even to this day, nobody is using it. That's what we're trying to avoid. So yeah, we have to find, and so for online services, we tend to focus on the quantitative things like split testing, which is like a randomized controlled trial from the language of science. That's the kind of the gold standard, easiest kind of experiment to run. But even in situations where the cycle times are long, where lead times are difficult, where there's a small number of customers, there are a lot of more qualitative things we can do, as simple as asking customers to pre-order based on marketing materials for a product we haven't yet built. That's the most common technique that is will eliminate 90% of hopelessly bad, designs, because for any product, customers have to be able to understand what it is and discover it and decide to buy it. And so if they can't do that, then certainly you're building the product's a waste of time.
So if we jump back to InView for a minute, is that what you did the second time round? You threw out all that code at InView. Did you put up a marketing splash page and try and find out whether that was relevant, or you went back and you did actually do that very iterative process and doing the A/B test, the split test that you talk about?
Yeah, because we had wasted so much time building so much software, we had this massive platform from which to experiment. So in some sense that was an asset, but was it really worth 6 months of my life? And of course actually way more than 6 months of my life, because it only took 6 months to build. No one's asked, how long did it take you to realize you had to pivot? I wish we had just done it on that first day when nobody used our product, but of course there's months and months of us trying to optimize and fix bugs and improve quality and all the things that we assumed would make customers want our product more. So the reason this is so frustrating is that in a regular job, those of you who work regular jobs for companies that are doing sustaining innovation, where you know your customer pretty well and the product you're building is similar to something you've done in the past, in those situations, just doing your job well is a win-win-win for you, your customers, and the company. if you make a product incrementally easier to use, or improve its performance a little bit, or make the marketing a little bit better targeted, then you will be promoted because customer behavior will improve a little bit, and that will make the results better for the company, right? So it's a true win-win-win. If you're building a product that people don't want, making it easier to use makes it easier for them to realize that they don't want it. And so it's actually lose-lose-lose, right? You look bad because how could you have made it easier to use with this negative result? Because the numbers went down because customer behavior is not improved. And that's the kind of testing that we spent a lot of time doing at InView, was constantly split testing improvements to try to see, hey, if we, because when you talk to an engineer of a product that nobody's using, they'll always say, well, you just didn't explain it good enough, or explain it better. And I've now learned anytime someone says that, it's like, excellent, you come with me, you explain it. You try, let's see. Because sometimes it is a messaging problem. And so we tried every kind of messaging problem, fixing bug, improving them, and it was all, we eventually got into a rhythm of constantly split testing our changes. And when it turned out that everything we could think of affected customer behavior, not one iota, we eventually had to conclude that we were fundamentally on the wrong path. So that is a really easy experimental situation to be in. It was easy because we wasted so much time getting ourselves into such a deep hole. It was more obvious than it really had to be. So yeah, by modern standards, we were pretty slow.
Okay, I'd like to throw it out to the audience now, and I wonder, could you put your hands up if you've got a question? And can we get Josh down the front? We've got a few questions here, Josh. Just over here.
So you said you spent 6 months building it, and how long did you spend in the spiral, trying to make yourself believe you were not wrong?
I'm embarrassed to admit, I mean, I think it was like 6 or 9 months more before we really realized it was time to pivot. It's pretty expensive failure.
What did you learn from it, and what was the next thing you did? Was that better?
Oh, yeah. Oh, so I'll just give a little bit more context. So InView is now a 3D social network. So it's like a typical social network, but it's with 3D avatars. So you have a kind of fantasy identity that you socialize with other people, but it's still it's anonymous, but it's personalized. So your personality comes through because you can decorate your room and customize your avatar, right? Does that make sense? But in 2004, when we started the company, the hot new social technology was not social networking, but instant messaging. So we built a 3D avatar instant messaging product. And the strategic brilliance that I can get any MBA in the world to be like, yes, this is an awesome idea, is as follows. Instead of building a standalone IM network, we will build an instant messaging add-on that interoperates with all the existing networks. So that way you don't have to like switch over to our network and bring all your friends with you. We can get around the network effects and the switching costs and the barrier to entry. Do people follow that? Okay. Sounds really good, right? And even better, our strategy would mean our product was inherently viral, because we would inject, I actually wrote the software, to inject an extra button into all the client UIs of all these complementary networks. So there would just be an extra button in the UI that would say, go 3D, and you click that one button, and we would replace your window on the screen with a 3D representation of you and your friend. And at the same time, we would send a URL directly through the chat stream to the other person, inviting them to download InView. So can you visualize InView spreading like a virus epidemic through all the IM networks, right? Doesn't that sound good? Isn't that a compelling vision? Can you visualize it? Okay, MBAs are really good at this part. And then comes the part where I set out to say, well, the only catch is, as you already know, customers wouldn't engage in the behavior. So everything I just said, the whole strategy is wrong. It's not true, the switching costs are not true, the durable barrier not true, the network effects are way overblown, and the viral epidemic, there's not going to be any virus if people won't click the goddamn button, right? So that's just basic empirical problem. And so here's what happened. We launched this product, and basically nobody would use it at first. But then after we really optimized the hell out of it, we got like, I don't know, a 1% conversion rate of people who would buy this product from us. So we're spending money on Google AdWords, bringing customers in every day, and we steady 1% conversion rate for months. But if you think about that, every day, it's not like the customers from today got on a conference call with the customers from yesterday. Said, hey everybody, how many of you bought the product? Okay, 1%? Excellent. We'll do the same thing, right? So it's an independent, time-controlled trial every day, but we're making the product better every day. So what gives, right? Something's not right here. If we're fixing bugs every day, and the product's getting better and easier to use every day, why are the conversion rates, cohort by cohort, the same? Well, obviously because our notion of quality does not correspond to our customer's notion of quality, which is why most of our quality-enhancing techniques that we've all learned from Agile don't work in startups, because if you don't know who the customer is, you literally do not know what the word quality means. So we eventually, kicking and screaming, since it was my code being thrown away, I was the last to admit that this was not working. And finally, we're like, look, this is obviously wrong. Let's try something different. And so the first pivot we made was away from an IAM add-on and towards a standalone IAM network, before we even understood to call it a social network. So that was, if we hadn't made that pivot, InView would be dead today instead of a profitable company. I mean, it was really, really important, and that set the groundwork for us to then make the pivot into social networking, and that really was when things started to take off.
Another question. Hands up, another question.
Hi, I wanted to understand what you were saying about the retrospective. It sounds like you're kind of saying maybe there's two different kinds of retrospectives, and tell me if this is right. One is effectively the business retrospective, which maybe has a different cycle time and a different purpose than a traditional agile retrospective, which I'm wondering if you would agree, still serves the purpose to ask a different question, which is the way in which we're building stuff working or not, which is a different question from, is what we're building the right stuff or not?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any objection to that, except that I don't believe that the product development team can be separated from the business team. Like, if you think about the grand bargain of Agile, it was a huge advance over the crap way we used to organize companies before, where business people would just kind of like make random orders of the engineers and tell them to do stuff that didn't make sense and interrupt them all the time. You guys remember the bad old days. The deal was, look, business people, in exchange for you stop interrupting us with things in progress and just come to the meetings that we tell you to, and otherwise stay away, leave us alone. In exchange, we promise to work on stuff in the order you say, and you can reorganize the backlog as much as you want. You can have 100 meetings a day to reorganize the backlog, and we don't care. We will be responsive. We'll never complain that you're changing the spec. You guys remember all those bad old days. So that solves a real problem, and it helped these two disjoint groups work together. But there's a cost to that bargain, and the cost is that the engineering team is implicitly saying, business people, we give you the steering wheel, you steer, and we're not responsible for the results. If you steer the car in a ditch, that's not our fault. How many of you have actually been on a team that's drove into a ditch as an engineer? How many times did that excuse actually help you not get blamed for the failure? Anybody? I think I saw one. Yeah. It doesn't actually... The amount of covering your ass that you think you're getting with Agile is not as high. I discovered the hard way. And in entrepreneurial teams, these artificial departmental barriers between product development and business are evil, and they have to be eliminated. So when we work as a cross-functional team, we have to do a retrospective where we say, what are all the impediments to us not learning as quickly as we want? And some of those impediments are just typical technical stuff that would get in our way, but some of those impediments are the hypotheses that we are testing are dumb. We should test better ones. Okay, well, how do we do that? And that has to be a team-wide challenge. So we talk about lean startups as built to learn, not just built to code, not just built to not to do our individual function, but really as an integrated organism that is trying to find this information out across the whole team. So it is a little bit different way of working, and it freaks some people out, no doubt. Is that helpful?
And no doubt it freaks out people in enterprises. So is there any opportunity to introduce a lean startup into an enterprise? Have you seen it done? Oh,
I have seen it done. And when I first started talking about lean startup, I told you that definition at the beginning, Human Institute, right? I added an asterisk to the very, very first slide I ever put with that thing. First time I ever spoke, I said, asterisk, notice it doesn't say anything about size of company, right? And all that stuff. I said that very confidently because I was like, look, this is a deductive consequence of the theory. I had no clue if that was true at all. I mean, I was an expert on stage, so I figured I may as well be confident, but I honestly didn't know if it was true. But from that very first talk, I've had the chance to work with real entrepreneurs inside gigantic companies, including some of the biggest enterprises in the world, and I've been able to see them implement these ideas. The key to adopting a framework like this is that you cannot adopt it top-down by fiat. You have to incubate the change in one internal startup. So even for companies that are completely waterfall, we have to view departmental boundaries as being as dumb as waterfall, because it's actually just the same thing. When we pass work department to department, that's waterfall. So even if we make our little department, our engineering team, super agile, but we take specification documents and pass to QA a functional piece of code, that's still waterfall. It has all the dumb, large batch, mistake-driven processes of waterfall. So we have to be just as embarrassed by that as we are if we worked in waterfall internally. And so what we do is pick one team and make it cross-functional. You know, a 5-person team is ideal, no more than 10 at the absolute max. That is represented by all of the functions that need to be involved in building something. So it might be, you know, 2 engineers, a marketer, a designer, and a product manager. That would be a great team to start, and that team has to be pulled out of the dominant culture, even if it's a very agile culture, and be held accountable to these learning milestones instead of just product and business milestones. And do not try this at home unless you really understand the theory, because there's a lot of details that matter a great deal. And I mean, I not to like be like, hey, you should buy my book, but you're getting it for free, so you just have to read the damn thing, okay? Seriously, there's a lot of the details matter in how we set up these teams, the kind of milestones we use, the kind of metrics we measure to. I mean, I really believe that stuff, but the general scheme is like that. We incubate the change in one startup, and then from there it will metastasize to other teams, and we can grow into a lean organization.
And what are some of the common, objections to rolling this out in an enterprise? I mean, you're talking not roll it out from the top down, but in a little incubator. Yeah. But how do you still get the approval to do that? I mean, I imagine that some of the people in the audience might have difficulty getting the approval to even do the incubator and make a start, right?
Yeah, for some reason, executive management is not in the room at sessions like this. And so the people who are the problem are not present. And just as, by the way, I'm like the worst consultant ever. You know, enterprises bring me in as a consultant, and it's always senior management who brings me in to make their people more innovative and more entrepreneurial. That's what they want to inject the DNA. And they're always surprised, and I'm like, look in the mirror, you're the problem. And you can imagine how often I get asked back to consult more, because although we have to incubate the change small, it must have the support of senior management. If you don't have that support, forget it. Because what we're going to do, like disruptive innovation by definition, is disruptive to the status quo, to the way that we measure our success, to the kind of customers we serve now, and also disruptive innovation is always low ROI. If you study the theory of disruptive innovation, there's like mathematical proofs for why whatever you do at the beginning of disruptive innovation will be considered low ROI. Because if it was high ROI, the organization would already be doing it. If it was obvious what customers wanted next in version 25, that needed to be improved from version 24, we'd already be doing it. But if we're going to switch, if we're going to build a device that's ultimately going to reduce our own margins, it's going to take us into a new business. It's like if you watch the newspapers or all these legacy businesses that can't get into the future, it's not because they don't know what the future is. It's because they're trapped in the innovator's dilemma. That's, there's all this good research on that subject. So I like the way that Scott Cook, who's the founder and still chairman of Intuit, put it. He said, in the traditional way that we teach management, we teach managers to play Caesar. Okay? Someone presents you with an idea, and you give it the thumbs up or thumbs down, live or die. And maybe in an advanced system, this is my aside, we'll have a stage gate development where we'll have periodic check-ins to go kill. But basically, it's Caesar sitting in each gate. And instead, the new role of management, of senior management especially in this world, is to create platforms for experimentation so that employees can discover for themselves what the right answer is, what things are going to work and not. So most companies think their employees are not innovative enough, and they put up posters and slogans, be more innovative, everybody do what's best for the company and be more innovative, right? They're like, that doesn't work that well. And sometimes if they're advanced, they'll have like a special brainstorming software, or like, they'll do 20% time or something to get more good ideas. But the problem is not the lack of good ideas. Every big company is drowning in good ideas. If I'm ever dumb enough to talk to a line employee at a big company and say, do you have any ideas for things this company could do better? Like, I will probably die before they stop talking. I mean, right? So you can't shut them up. But I can shut them up real easy if I ask a different question. I say, well, do you know the process, the exact process you would use to prove that one of your ideas was actually good and worth investing in? And that gets real quiet real fast. It's like, maybe I could tell my manager to tell his manager to tell his manager to beg somebody for, it's like, no one knows. It's a mystery. So imagine you worked in an environment where it was considered obvious that every idea should be subject to scientific testing, not manager bullshit, and that there was a process for quickly and cheaply discovering who's right and who's wrong and doubling down on the people who are right. Creating that culture and that process is the responsibility of senior management and senior management alone.
Let's take another question from the audience. I'll get that one.
How you doing? Hey. As a self-proclaimed agile zealot, Did you apply Agile to writing your book?
Well, thank you. I mean, usually I get that question as, did you apply Lean Startup to writing your book? Otherwise, you're a giant hypocrite. And yes, I did. So I'll give you a flavor of it. You should know, by the way, that if anyone ever dealt with a traditional publishing process, my book is published by a division of Random House, so I mean, as traditional as it gets. It is like waterfall all the way down, right? It's turtles all the way down, and the turtle is waterfall. So, I mean, this was not easy for them to understand. And just to give you a flavor of it, I was once in investigating the publishing industry, trying to decide who I should publish with and should I even publish at all. I talked to someone and I said, well, would you object if in one of our conversations about, say, what the book cover should look like, if I brought some customer data about which covers converted better and worse? And I got a question back, which I did not expect, which was, what do you mean by customer? And I was like, you know, the buyer. And they're like, you mean like the category buyer at Barnes & Noble? I was like, no. I mean, you know, the person that decides to purchase the, I was like really struggling for words, like the person who makes the purchase decision, the end user. And they're like, you know, the product manager of the Kindle division. Like, they're like, what are you talking about? Like the PR, they're like naming all these other people. And finally I was like, okay, wait. Oh, I know, the reader. I meant the reader. And they're like, what, are you gonna like do a focus group or something? Who cares? Like, what does that have to do with anything? I couldn't understand what I was talking about, okay? We're talking about an ossified, atrophying business. That's what we're talking about. So I had to do stuff on my own initiative to try to figure out, is this book worth doing? And just to give you a flavor of it, the first people that pre-ordered this book bought it from me a year before it came out. The book came out last September. We're talking about 2 Septembers ago, when there was no book. It was just a web page, a PayPal checkout page, and a blog post. It said, hey, everybody, there's a book coming out next fall sometime. I didn't even know what to charge for the book. Okay, I didn't know how much it was going to cost, because in publishing, you don't set the price till you know how many pages it will have. Because obviously, that's the way to pick the optimal price to make the most money, is how many pages a book has. Because that's the printing cost, which is, 5% of the overall price. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting carried away. So I just made up a price. I said the book will be $30. If you pre-order it from me now, I promise you that you will get it when it comes out. That's it. Okay, no special deal. No, if you really are excited about this book, you do me a favor. Thank you. It's $30. And if the price is lower on Amazon when it comes out, too bad. You'll have overpaid for it. I'm sorry. And that was it. That was the MVP. And I sold a ton of copies at $30, a year before the book came out. And so I knew that there were people who were like rabidly, eagerly waiting. And of course, then that gave me a great set of people to survey and to talk to and to test. I mean, it gave me this pool of test readers who would distinguish themselves not because they think I'm a nice person or they follow me on Twitter or some crap like that, but these are people who really, really, really wanted the first copies of this thing. Were very excited about it. And then in the intervening time, I had a year to constantly test how to sell the book, which, people think of that as marketing, but it's also like a test of what the book should be about. Because, the book has to actually deliver on the positioning that you offer. Otherwise, you're just selling another crap diet book, and we got enough of those. Although, interestingly, business books are on the same New York Times bestseller list as crap diet books, so make of that what you will. So what I did is I had my friends at Pivotal Labs down the street here build me a custom website where we were selling this book for pre-order before it was ever on Amazon or any other place. And we could split test different marketing messages, different covers, different titles, different author photos. We could test anything we wanted to discover how people would respond to buying it. So, we treated that as a startup. And as a result, by the time the book actually launched, I already knew how it was going to sell in its first, out of the gate. I knew that it would be a bestseller already. I had the data to predict what was going to happen. So, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I like the book. I look forward to the next iteration.
Thank you very much.
One other thing, if you had a choice, what would you say is your preference of writing? Books, business cases, or business plans, or source code?
What's the kind of writing I like the most?
Which writing would you do if you had a choice?
I mean, I like writing prose just as much as I like writing code, it turns out. And unfortunately, it's the same part of my brain, so I can't do both, which I think really sucks. So yeah, I would be very happy to write prose or code. I actually prefer it much more to standing up in front of a bunch of people and talking. So thank you for being here. I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I'm actually quite introverted, so that'd be my true preference.
Well, with that in mind, we're going to wrap up now, guys. So thank you very much, Eric. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.